So why don't we just start at the beginning? Why did you volunteer for the CRIC?
I joined the Army to be a platoon commander. That was my goal, was to deploy overseas as a platoon commander. When I was a young teenager growing up, just wanted to join the infantry and fill that role, and I thought it was an extreme challenge to do that. So great timing that I was, right place, right time. This tour was coming up, and they were bringing, a full platoon from the Calgary Highlanders. So I thought it was, just a perfect opportunity to go overseas. It also timed really well with my school. I was just finishing my undergrad degree at University of Calgary and was going to graduate, and then workup training was starting. So it just seemed like the perfect fit of something to progress onto after school.
Can you just give me a bit of the broader context? What the CRIC was? Like, what does that acronym stand for, and how unusual was it at the time?
Yeah, the CRIC is the Composite Reserve Infantry Company. And this was after sort of a number of years of deployments to Bosnia, and they wanted to deploy a full company of infanteers to the mission. And at the time, they had three infantry companies in the battle group formed by one PPCLI. Two of them were regular force. One of them was reserve. So this was the first time that the reserves had done anything like this. So it was a great opportunity for us as reservists. It was also sort of testing a new model to see if the reserves would be able to produce an infantry company capable of deploying on operations.
You're from a military family. What did your family and friends say when you told them you were going to Bosnia?
Yeah, they were total support. My father spent just under 40 years in the regular force, and my mother was in the British Army a long time ago, and so really, really happy that I was going on a deployment, that I was succeeding in my career in the reserves, and it was all good stuff. And I mean, most of my friends at that time were, and still are, in the Army, so they were obviously all supportive of it. And back in that day, it wasn't a dangerous mission. It wasn't a politically sensitive mission. It was just seen as a good, positive thing to do. So tons of support to go and do that.
You mentioned how unusual this was. How much pressure was there on you and the other members of this company to make it work? How much did you feel that pressure from the beginning?
Yeah, definitely. And I understand where the regular force is coming from. They didn't really know any of us, right? So they basically put an extra 25-30% of numbers as there were positions onto workup training. So there was a big competition when we went and we started doing our workup training in Wainwright. And we did a full month of training before the battle group came together and did sort of all the TMST training to lead up to that. And basically it was just a big selection. So there's 3 platoon commanders, and there was 4 platoon commanders that showed up. So one of us, wasn't going to go on the tour, and so we had to sort of prove ourselves and make sure that we were, performing to a certain standard. They ran a very aggressive, very, very challenging exercise for us that lasted just under a month. So it was great training for us. It was a great opportunity, but it wasn't easy. There was a lot of sort of animosity, a lot of doubts that we would be able to perform up to the level that they wanted, and so that was definitely a challenge. We were kind of seen as the stepchildren of the battle group for a long time.
Which is interesting because up until that point, we'd sent battle groups with 20-25% reservists, not as a reserve company. Is that what made the difference?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there was the perception that we were also stealing some jobs, if you would. And in fact, as soon as we sort of finished that month of workup training and we got to battalion and we were, sort of starting the workup training, there was a decision from Ottawa that cut one of the companies. And so the CO of the battalion formed everyone up and said, like, I gotta cut a company, right? And I've been told it has to be one of the 2 regular force companies, so I don't have a choice. So, kind of that's a political, politically worded statement, but you know what he meant is like if I had the choice, I would have cut the reserves because they're not mine. We're sort of the outsiders, and so I have to cut one of my companies, right? And after that, like you'd walk down the halls and you just get these sneers and stuff from the guys in the battalion that were like, "Yeah, man, you're stealing our deployment. You shouldn't be here," type of thing. And that was just sort of pervasive in the attitude between the regular force and the reserves, in the sort of late 90s, right? Sort of early 90s, late 90s. And it took a lot of work to overcome that. And when guys went on a individual, like augmentation, and they were put in a section, like 9 times out of 10 they did a great job because they're good soldiers, and you get to work with people one-on-one, and there's no problems with that, right? I knew all the other platoon commanders of the battalion because I did phase with them, and they knew that I was a good guy and I was competent and I was just like they were, so they were my friends. So there was no animosity on that level. But if you didn't have that personal connection or someone you worked with a lot, there was definitely a divide, something you had to get over, and basically all you can do is ignore it and do your job and try to perform the tasks that you're asked to do.
How much collectively, how much operational experience was there in your company? How many of those guys have been to Bosnia, Croatia before?
Quite a bit. Yeah, quite a bit. There was a number of guys that have been to Croatia before. Generally a lot of the section commanders and stuff was a mix. There's a lot of sort of younger guys who didn't have a deployment or sort of went over as a corporal. But it was a fairly stagnant tour. It wasn't very, dynamic or super challenging. So as long as you were competent in that role that you were filling, then it was a good experience for you to go over. So we had a good mix of people that had deployments, had a lot of experience, and people that were, like myself, never been on a deployment before, didn't know what to expect.
And how was it? You mentioned there was a platoon of Calgary Highlanders. What was the rest of the mix?
Yeah, so basically there was a platoon. The company was formed from Land Force Western area, and there was a platoon that came from 41 Brigade, a platoon that came from 38 Brigade, and a platoon from 39 Brigade. And so there was a mix of Calgary Highlanders and LERs that formed my platoon, 11 platoon. And as soon as we got to the company, that was the sort of the thought behind it. But then we were all sort of spread. So I had guys in the platoon that were, from one of our flanking formations, and similar, we had guys that from the Calgary Highlanders that came that end up, transferring to another platoon for whatever reason. And then the company headquarters was just a mix, of people from all over Western area.
And so you talked about having to prove yourselves. How did you go about doing that? And was there a time when you felt like you'd finally accomplished that?
I think we just tried to settle in and do our jobs the best we could. And I don't think that it was ever like widely acknowledged or accepted that the Delta company was doing a really good job. There was a ton of animosity and sort of favoritism played throughout the tour, in terms of who gets the good taskings and who gets to go on, go to Zagreb for a weekend or whatever, to do a tasking, and we didn't get a lot of those things. We didn't get a lot of support for the operations we were doing, but I mean that didn't deter us. We went and we tried to do the best we could. And if you look at statistics for the battalion as a whole, we were doing coordinate searches at a much higher pace and a much more success than anyone else in the battle group. Does that mean we're better than them? No, it just means that we were, focusing on our mission and trying to do what we were there to do, and we were being successful at it. And I think there was a lot of pride and self-satisfaction in just doing that. We don't need to be told you're doing a good job. You kind of know that you and your soldiers are doing what you're asked to do. So that was good enough for us.
All these soldiers in the company from across the West all come together just for this mission. how coherent was this company?
Yeah, it was great. You know, a lot of us didn't know each other in the first day one when we met each other. Some guys did, you know, they'd crossed paths before. But I mean, after you spend 2, 3, 4 weeks in the field together, you get to know each other pretty well. And we were, you know, doing workup training for 6 months before we even deployed. So, and at the end of it, I mean, the full kind of commitment is over a year. You know, we spent 8 months in theater. So you know each other quite well by the end of it, right? So this doesn't matter what cap badge you're wearing on your hat. You're all part of the same unit, and you're all doing the same job, and you know each other really well, and you start to get to know, you know, who's good at doing what, you know, who needs support and what, and you're developing people just like you would if you were all in the same unit.
So what was your, before you headed over there, what was your expectation about what it was going to be like once you hit the ground?
I mean, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. You know, you hear stories about, you know, the Croatia mission and the earlier days in Bosnia, and things were going on, and I knew that obviously the war was over for quite a while. But I was interested just to see the ground and see where some of these events were occurring and what the state of the country was at the time, and I wasn't quite sure how that would play out. I mean, a lot of our job at the time was to mentor and develop the police and support the police in their missions. There really wasn't a high threat. You know, there's no military threat. A lot of it was just criminal activity, and try to provide, you know, safety and security for the population. So I wasn't sure what that would mean when we arrived, right? But generally speaking, it was a great tour. I mean, there was tons of opportunity to go and do patrols and meet. I went like 4 days of the week. I would do a patrol, and I'd meet one of the chiefs of the police in the Upstinas that I controlled or was patrolling responsible for, and have a an hour, 2 hour long conversation with him, and just help work through some of the issues that he's dealing with that particular week. And the next day I'd go to a different one and do the same thing. So great opportunity for me to learn and help them overcome some of the challenges they have. And we had a full patrolling schedule, so had to manage all of our sections going and doing patrols all over the place, doing similar things, talking to locals, helping sort out labor disputes. They would do like a roadblock or something like that, so we'd have to go and start asking questions. How's it going? What are you looking for? Just making sure that it's not getting out of hand.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So, and then we did a ton of sort of deliberate operations to help remove weapons and ammunition from the population. So it was interesting. Right when we were there, right before we got there, the Bosnia passed a law that was illegal for you to hold certain amount of weapons, and they basically said, okay, we know that they exist from the war, so you've got a period of basically a year to come and turn all these in, and if you come and turn it in voluntarily, then no questions asked, thank you very much. But if this period passes and now we find it on you, then you could be charged under the Firearms Act or whatever they called it. So we did a ton of operations to try and promote that and get people to hand over all of the old grenades they had in their, in their barn or whatever.
When it comes to that interpersonal interaction, do you think the fact that you were reservists with different backgrounds made a difference in terms of how you related to the Bosnians? Yeah, I'm sure. It certainly didn't hurt. I mean, I don't think it was sort of the magic bullet that we had. But whenever you get a really diverse group of soldiers, with careers and trades and everything else from different experiences, it just enhances your ability to do things that are, sort of call it less kinetic, right? If you're doing more, a wider variety of tasks that require interaction with the population and development of projects and things like that, you can rely a lot more on the breadth of your soldiers to do that. So, it was quite easy to delegate things to different sections, and they had no issues.
handling all those things on their own.
You talked about sort of the kind of tasks that you performed. Is there a day or an incident that stands out for you?
I mean, there was no significant defining moment in that tour. There was a lot of good things that happened. There was one company raid that we did. That was quite fun. It was good. We spent about a week leading up to it and doing all the planning and trying not to tip our hat that we were going to do this raid. It was on a textile factory that we were suspecting was moving weapons and some drugs and people through it. And so we were going to do a raid on this facility. And it was a big, large factory, had a bunch of different routes in and out. And so we had to put surveillance on it for most of the week to try to get sort of pattern activity. Early morning, put in our outer cordons, and then, the company left like 0500 in the morning to set up our cordon and start searching this place. And so I think it was a really good accomplishment for us. It was a successful place, successful operation. We didn't find anything, but that's a good thing. That the fact that we executed the operation the way that we wanted to was great. I remember the owner of the textile factory showed up, was like, "What's going on? Like, you wanna get in to this room?" And he'd forgotten a bunch of his keys because he wasn't expecting us, and so he was just like kicking down the doors, just because he was frazzled. And he's like, "I don't know, whatever. You want to look in here?" And we're like, "Hey, you don't have to destroy your place. Just go find the key." So yeah, that was a good sort of example of an operation we did as a company, and we did stuff like that all the time. Mostly at the platoon level, but we did a few operations at the company level, and it was working well when we were there.
How did it live up to your expectations as a platoon commander on your first deployment?
Yeah, I was really happy with it. There was a lot of challenges. A lot of them were internal, to the Army, right? It was sort of a stale tour, and there was a lot of Armyisms put into it that were frustrating, and you had to work through that. But it was also, it was a challenge and it was a good learning experience to understand, you have soldiers doing a job, and you have, a higher headquarters that has expectations and requirements that you have to fulfill, and large part of that is translating and managing messages and upwards and downwards. So as a platoon commander, I was like that buffer for the first time, and it was frustrating at times. It was challenging because it didn't always do it right, but it was a great learning experience to figure out how the Army works in that manner, and what things you need to sort of intervene and what things you need to just sort of ignore, and make sure your soldiers have what they need and let them go do their job.
Can you give me a specific example of what an Armyism is in this context?
Yeah, a lot of pressure was given to us to do a certain amount of patrolling, but we had ILTISs at the time, and they would break a lot, and we didn't have enough sections or ILTISs to do all the patrols that the battalion wanted us to do, and so it was a bit of a managing of expectations up and down to say, all right, guys, here's a really heavy patrolling schedule. Like, I know you're tired, but get the sort of minimum amount of sleep that you have to get to be on the road, and then get back out there, right? Like, this is important. But on the same side, we had to push up through our ops up to battalion that, like, I can't do all of the patrols. I don't have the resources, so I can't go knit an ILTIS, right? I can't create an extra section. Like, they're tapped out. They're doing as much as they can. So we need to adjust some things. So what do you want me to not do? And that message wasn't received very well. There's a bunch of arguing about it. But at the end of the day, I mean, you have to do the best you can with what you have, and that message up is an important one, that I can't do what you are asking me to do because I don't have the resources. And it's not insubordinate. It's you helping the chain of command figure out what, how to accomplish the mission, right? And there was a lot of, call it stubbornness to say, okay, we're just tasking you, so you have to do it. Like, okay, well, I'd love to do it, but how do you want me to do that when I don't have enough resources? So.
Was the regular force company also patrolling in Iltises?
No, they had labs. So I remember the Minister of Defense came out, and he had to do, they asked us to give him a tour of the area and stuff. So one of my sections tasked him to go take him on a patrol, right? And they're going along in a few Iltises, and one of the Iltises is going up a hill, and it breaks, and there's steam coming out of it, and they're like, oh man. And one of the aides came up to the section commander and started jacking him up, because we know that the Iltises are crap. The minister knows this is an issue, but this is just outrageous that you're staging this Iltis breaking down when you have them on a tour. And the section manager's like, what are you talking about? Didn't stage anything. Like, this actually happens, So it was kind of funny. He came back all razzled and.
So ultimately, how do you, in the bigger picture, how successful do you think the CRIC was as a employment concept?
I think it was very successful. If you have the amount of time to do all your workup training and lead up to it, can definitely be a combat-ready, combat-capable subunit. No questions asked. Could we do it could we sustain it on a mission-by-mission basis? Probably not. I mean, it took a lot of resources and a lot of, the people willing in Western Canada to put that together. They did another one, the tour after us, so there was a composite reserve company that took over from us. But they had to open it up, not just infantry, but to all combat arms across Western Canada in order to get a full company. And so if you're looking for an infantry company, for successive deployments, I don't know if we would be able to sustain that at our current numbers. But numbers withstanding, as a concept of deploying a subunit on a mission, I think it was very successful.
Hypothetically, how do you think that model would have worked for Afghanistan? On a one-off basis, or sort of to be repeated?
I think it would have worked. I know there was a lot of push to have a higher than a platoon deploy as a unit. There's some challenges with the Afghanistan mission because the companies there were mounted, and so there would have to be a bunch of extra training given to the reserves. But if you were to put a light force or dismounted force on an operation and it was kinetic, infantry stuff in combat, I have no questions that it would be able to perform its duty.
Have you had any thoughts? Do you have any thoughts about, is it better to have reservists in their own subunit or intermingled, individual augmentation?
They both work. So I think you have to figure out the best blend for that mission, and I think the way that we do augmentation, or we do force generation for deployments, we're stuck in it has to be individual augmentation, and I don't know which one would be better, but I think there are scenarios where it would be better to have formed subunits, and there would be scenarios where it's better to have individual augmentation, and we should be open enough to actually analyze that and choose the better method. We're not there. We're stuck in this model that has to be individual augmentation.
Have you got specific scenarios in mind as you say that?
Well, there's force generation issues with the regular force because they have a very high tempo, right, and their battalions aren't full, and they at times have difficulties filling out all of their leadership of different things. So if you could take a platoon and stick it into a rifle company, it would be less disruptive for them, than just having them to spread everything out and put people in individual spots. So that'd be an example of somewhere you could form a platoon and put it into a company and have a mix. there's also, they don't have enough companies to do everything they're tasked, right? So if you can form a full company and take a task for a deployment, it would help out the mission, that's being deployed.
Sort of finally on the Bosnia stuff, after more than a year of workup training and deployment, what was it like? Like, how did you come home? What were the circumstances, and then what was that like making that transition?
Yeah, it was. Well, I mean, we came home, landed in Edmonton, did a couple days of out clearance, and then were released to go on leave and back to our home units. So it was pretty quick. Not a lot of time to, reintegrate with the people that you deployed with. It was a bit of a challenge, but it wasn't a very stressful mission. So it's not like we needed to sort of work through issues together, or just have time to, time together back in Canada before we parted ways. So it was fairly quick, and just basically back to Calgary. I was in the summer, starting the summer months, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And turns out I got a phone call from the adjutant of the Calgary Highlanders. There's a Class B with the Skyhawks that was open, and he asked me if I wanted to do it, and I said, yeah, I got nothing going on right now. Why not? So I picked up that Class B, and I started sort of a few weeks later out in Trenton. So I didn't have a lot of difficulty transitioning, because basically I just kept working for the Army.
Even though it wasn't particularly stressful, but you're still going from, a highly focused, mission-oriented environment to back to civilian life, back to civilian concerns. Any issues that way?
No, I don't think so in this particular tour. I mean, a lot of guys sort of might have found it difficult just to leave the Army life and have to go back to civilian life. I found it a much starker difference my tour in Afghanistan when I got home, because, well, it was very stressful. And then, like a week after I got home, I started a job at Royal Bank, right? And I sat in my office, and Royal Bank was like I was being shot at 2 weeks ago, and here I'm in a bank, in my office, what's gonna happen? This is totally weird. But yeah, I mean, that structure of, you get up in the morning and the mess is right there. You don't have to, do anything. You just go to the mess, eat breakfast, and then, grab a coffee and go, to your O group, or start your patrols for the day. That structure of the Army is something I think a lot of people appreciate. They hate it at first, but then when you do it for a while and it stops, you sort of gain an appreciation for how simple life is in the Army. And now you got to figure things out for yourself. Well, how am I going to go get breakfast? I'm going to make it. I'm going to buy it. I got to go to the grocery store. Man, I got to go to work now. There's a lot more complexities. You have a lot more freedom back in civilian life.
That's it for my questions on Bosnia. Is there anything that you want to add? Anything that we haven't covered about that tour?
No. I don't think so.
What year did you go to Afghanistan?
2008.
So 2008. Now it's a shooting war. It's Afghanistan. What's your motivation this time around?
Well, I was at this point in my career. I'd worked Class B at a number of different jobs for a few years. And I was kind of getting tired of it. I was deciding, whether I wanted to join the regular force and stay in the Army full time, or get out and make a go at sort of a civilian career, something that I, had a lot of passion for and wanted to do. But, the mission in Afghanistan was ramping up, and you had a lot of guys that went over on 106, and I knew a bunch of guys that went over in 2007, and again, there was a really high deployment opportunity from the unit to send a bunch of guys onto a variety of different tasks. And the culture in the unit at that time was heavily oriented around doing your part, right? And the Calgary Highlanders have to do our part for this mission, and we're given an opportunity, and so we gotta deploy. And so it was a pretty easy decision. I just didn't see any other choice to make. There was Canadians were kind of going, what's going on here? Like, how are we going to fill this requirement? And I thought back and went, I'm a qualified infantry officer. I'm available and capable to go. So if I'm not going to go, then who else is going to go? Is someone going to have to go like a second or third time? So I got to do my part for the mission and for the Canadian Forces and go on a deployment. So that was the decision made. It was a pretty simple one.
This time around, now Canada's taken casualties. By this point, it's in the news. What are your family and friends saying to you about this decision?
Well, it's kind of a funny story because I initially applied for this job at the Afghan National Training Center, which was in Kabul. It was training, sort of leadership courses and basic military courses and stuff like that to the Afghans. It was fairly, mundane, not in combat role, right? And so the way I sold it to my spouse at the time, common law spouse, was, oh, don't worry, like, I could go on the omelet, right? Which is very dangerous, but I'm just training Afghan soldiers in Kabul. They're just courses, right? We're not going on operations. And we were on leave in Austria, which is where my spouse was from, and I got a phone call. I had to sort of check in because when I got back from that, we were going to go and start doing our workup training. And I remember talking to Jim Scott, who was there, sort of organizing things. Just, okay, things are changing. They collapsed the ANTC, and they're now moving a select few of us over to the omelet because they just expanded the omelet positions by 3. And so they, want you to come over and be a company commander mentor. Are you okay with that? And I went, yeah, that's amazing. Like, that's the job I want. Like, that's the A grade position to have. But I had to go back and I forgot that I'd sort of sold it in this way to my spouse. So I went and said, hey, great news. Like, I'm going to the omelet. And she goes, wait a minute. That's that dangerous one, right? And I go, okay, it's not that dangerous. And I had to backpedal, from that. So there's not great support. A lot of people were worried or concerned, but again, my parents are great, and they fully understood. My dad was very excited, and my family had total support for that. And a lot of friends were just curious. Man, this is a dangerous mission. Hope you're going to be okay. But this is what you do. This is who you are. So go do it. And lots of support in that manner.
Can you, like you did with the CRIC, just explain what does omelet stand for and what is the job of the omelet?
Yeah, the omelet is the operational mentor and liaison team, and their role is to mentor the Afghan National Army on operations. And so we were organized on a sort of battalion level, what they call a Kandak. There's 4 companies in the Kandak, so we had a battalion level commander, and that was sort of like our leadership and helped organize us. And then we had 4 company commander teams. So we had the captain was the company commander mentor. There was a warrant officer who mentored the senior NCO, was a sergeant major type thing. And then we had a driver and a gunner. And so it was a detachment that got attached to an Afghan company and was with them for their entire deployment. We were deployed into Zari district, and there was omelet in Pashmal as well, or in Panjwai as well. And so we provided mentorship on operations. We also provided all the enablers that they needed and interacted with sort of NATO forces that were on the battlefield. And so we provided all their artillery and air support, medical, medevac support, and if we were doing any operations with the battle group or whoever else is around, we would be the sort of conduit between that.
So you talked about your motivation, like the why you wanted to go. What did you want from this tour? What did you want this tour to be like this time around?
Well, I mean, like any soldier, I think you have this desire, passion to figure out or to experience combat and see what it's really like and see whether you would perform well or not, right? And so the way I kind of explain it now, post-haste, is be careful what you ask for, right? I certainly had that burning desire to get into combat. And I see it in guys that, when I got home specifically, and there were still opportunities. They're like, man, I want to do what you did. And you go, well, yeah, it's, I understand where you're coming from, but, you don't necessarily want to go through that, because it's a lot of negativity and bad things that come with it too. It's dangerous, right? And you could see things you just can't unsee. So at the time, I wanted to do that. Not necessarily be stupid or take risks that were, not warranted, but just to experience it and to see firsthand what it was like. But most of all, in the omelet, in that position that we were given, it was a really unique challenge, right? We didn't know what to expect. Like, we're supposed to be there mentoring an Afghan company. Like, I'd never been a company commander. I was a captain. So how am I going to do that? How am I going to interact with them? I don't know what they're like. What are the societal differences? How are we going to communicate with each other? How's it going to work talking to someone, in combat through an interpreter? There's a whole bunch of challenges that are associated with that. So yeah, it was interesting. It was something that was totally outside of the box of something we trained for.
So you had to bring those enablers. You had to do, as you said, those challenges. So what did you do for your workup training? How did the Army prepare you?
Yeah, so we did some unique workup training. We didn't do the normal sort of workup training with the battle group. We did a lot of weapons training to make sure we were competent in all the sort of weapons that we would see. We did a lot of like artillery call for fire, and we had to do emergency, calling in a close air support, so that we, if we had to and we couldn't get our JTAC on the phone, or he wasn't on patrol with us, then we could call in fast air and support us. So we did things like that. Did a lot of shooting, and the battle group was doing their sort of live fire exercises, and they were training with how to interact with an Afghan company sort of on your flank or in their operation with you. Which was obviously Canadian soldiers doing this in Wainwright, but they were acting like Afghans, and so we were attached to them for a few iterations through the range to practice. How are we going to mentor? Like, what does that role mean? Following them and helping them guide them through the operation and what their tasks are. From a Canadian sort of battalion commander to a Afghan company commander, you had to translate that mission, what it means to them, and help walk them through it. So we did things like that. So it was interesting, and it was challenging, and we ran some of the best training that I've ever seen in the Army. So,
what did you think of? By this point, there's all the role players in Wainwright for your workup training. Was that effective in hindsight in terms of preparing people for what they would encounter?
No, I think the role players sort of, and I don't fault them because they didn't know any better, right? They hadn't done this job, but they were basically just trying to, like, they were acting and they were trying to mess you up, which was like totally not what the Afghans are doing. They're trying to do their job. They live there. They're trying to survive, a war in their country, right? So it was a lot more collaborative, and interdependent in Afghanistan, whereas on workup training, the actors were just trying to catch you out on something, right? Which I guess has some learning pieces to it, but I wish it was more constructive than it was, than the approach that they took.
It sounds like a very, it was, right, a very demanding role for you to be in as a captain. What was the fact that you were a reservist again? What was the dynamic, regular and reserve, this time?
This time there was like almost none. So there was when I got to battalion and we were in three PPCLI's lines, there was a sergeant there that I knew from the Skyhawks, Chris Toombs, and I sort of chatted with him a bunch of times, and we were forming up for a battalion parade, and I pulled out my Balmoral and I put it on, and he goes, what are you doing? Like, what? I go, what are you talking about? He goes, I thought you were in the battalion now. I go, no, I'm a reservist, like I'm in the omelet. And he goes, oh man, like I had no idea. And that's the way we were treated there. Like, a lot of the omelette was regular force, and we had a lot of reserve augmentation, and there was like zero animosity or treatment, different treatment of us. We were all just there together. And I think very early on, I mean, they selected people pretty carefully to go into that unit, I think. And, as soon as we started training together, people knew you were competent or not, and they treated you like a soldier, which is exactly what you want. So, I was the only reservist in my team, but, I had 3 great soldiers with me, and we worked together as a unit.
So tell me about who were the other 3?
So the warrant officer I was paired with was Lance Nielsen, and my driver was Corporal Bushy, and my gunner was Corporal Scott, and that's what we deployed with. When we first got into theater, we spent like a day in Kandahar, and then deployed out to our strong point, Sangasar, and that was it. That was us for that, for half the tour was us out in the middle of this strong point, isolated from everyone else. So we had to get close as a unit.
So what are your first impressions getting to Kandahar and then moving out into Zari?
Kandahar was a huge base, lots of things going on. We had to go and do these really weird briefings, like don't pick up a mine. Okay, thanks for the tip. I don't know why I'm sitting here right now. And but it was very short, that type of stuff. And we went out, we deployed the next morning, and there's this part of the omelette called Sec 4, Security Force, Sec 4, and they did all the sort of security on our road movements and bringing supplies out to us and stuff. So they did a road movement for us to get out to our different strong points. And we jumped into a bison basically in the back, and you're like in this enclosed thing, and I'm thinking, man, like, I don't know what I'm about to go outside the wire in Kandahar, and, like there's IEDs all over the place. Like, I hope I'm not going to die in this little box that I can't see anything, I can't control anything. It's a very weird feeling, So I guess what most soldiers do when they can't control anything, I just try to go to sleep and just sort of get through it, and and then so we ended up in Fob Wilson, which was one of the sort of larger bases out along the ring road, and the ramp dropped, and there's the Afghan company all playing soccer, and we're like, oh, okay, this is kind of weird, and so we just kind of watched them for a bit and interact with them, and then we ended up going to another base where we had to basically pick up our rucksacks and walk 3.5 kilometers, 4 kilometers into our strong point. So that was an interesting experience. We were told, only pack what you need, and we'll get the rest of your kit out to you, in a few days on a helicopter or something. So we had our rucksacks, 150 pounds, a couple extra socks, and the rest was just sort of ammo and mission kit. Do you carry your EOTech scope or your Alcan scope? And so we had one in our rucksack, and and we had to do this patrol back to our strong point where we're going to live. Started doing the handover as we started walking back, and I'm talking to the guy I'm taking over from, and he's explaining things to me as we're like just trying to get there because our rucks were so heavy. So yeah, it was very, very interesting experience, and so much happening all in sort of one short period of time. It wasn't a lot of time to take in, the sights, and you're still in the back of your mind, you're going, man, like I'm in, like we could be in combat at any point, right? Like I don't know what's going to happen here. So I don't know how prepared I am, what's going on. This is all new still. So it was a very rapid, quick way to get into theater and, and get into your job. So
in hindsight, how well prepared were you to be there under those circumstances?
I think it was really well. When we got to Kandahar, my boss pulled me aside and said, hey, by the way, we didn't really know this, but like Sangasar is totally isolated. So good news and bad news for you. Bad news is, you're going to be totally isolated, and if you get a casualty, like we probably can't get to you very quickly, like except for helicopter. So the good news is I'm going to give you a medic. Hey, that's good, right? So I'm like, oh great, thanks, I guess. So we had Master Corporal Danila Duke attached to us, to our team, as soon as we got there, and he came in with us, which was great because we had an extra guy, and it was a bit of a balancing act. When you go on a patrol, you got to have a guy on the radio, and then you only bring 3 guys, and we were reduced a little bit. So I did this for quite a few patrols, where I would have to go on a patrol by myself, and my Lance Nielsen, the warrant officer, he was sort of with one platoon on the right flank, and I was with another platoon on the left flank, but I was by myself, right? I'd give him the other guy that we were on patrol with, and so it's just me with a bunch of Afghans, and you get in combat, and if you get injured or something, like, are they going to leave you or are they not? You don't really know. So we had a sort of dynamic, experience and figure out problems like that. But but I think once we got into it, we were trained. You just start doing your drills. Reaction to effective enemy fire. You just start doing your drills, right? And that was purely based on training. So it didn't take long for us to get in combat. The next day after we arrived in Sangasar, we went on a patrol, and basically it was like, hey, let's just go see the battle space, and I'll show you the easy place first. There's very delineated areas that were around, so we basically went to the west a bit, which was very friendly. Went through a neighborhood, people talk to you and whatever, and we went on this sort of route around, and he was showing me some stuff, and then we hit Route Ottawa, which is the road that we walk down, that we do all the resupply on. And he goes, okay, this is like the line. Like if you cross this line, and you're moving into the movement lanes of the Taliban, sort of into Zari province. So they're watching you as soon as you cross this road. Like they're watching us right now. I go, really? He goes, yeah. Like there's people, you can't really see them, but they know we're here and they're watching us. And so if we start to move, they move from watching us, and they'll start to delay us. They'll have a guy sort of shoot at us and see what we'll do. And if we keep moving, into some of the compounds that like there'll be a line of defense, and we'll get into a serious firefight. So, okay, crazy. Well, let's go see what this is like. So he's like, okay. So we crossed the road, and went 500-600 meters in, and we started to see farmers who were farming, and watching us. To them now going, okay, we gotta they'd drop their rake and they'd run into a building and go, what are they doing? And they were going to grab weapons. And the guy I was handing over from, he's telling me like, okay, this is what this means. This is a tactical indicator. All these things you need to learn. So okay, we're gonna withdraw now because they're gonna come and bump us, right? It's like, okay. So we started to move back, and I hear like the PKM, shoot at these guys, and I see this Afghan sort of get hit, the Taliban guy get hit, and another guy jumps up and he fires an RPG, and I'm like, everyone else dives to the ground, and I'm just sitting there looking at this thing like, holy fuck, is that an RPG? Like, really? And it's coming right at us, and it hits this wall that's like 40 meters in front of me, like just hits the top of the wall and explodes. I go, wow, okay. All right, get my head in the game here. Like I gotta sort of react, not just stand there looking at stuff. And that was the first day, the first patrol we were on. We had a UAV, and I learned really quickly the Afghans are like the ANA guys are checked out. Like they're warriors. They knew how to do fire maneuver, and they had cover, and the machine guns were covering guys as we were withdrawing back, and so they knew all the basic stuff like that. And there wasn't a lot of sort of teaching on how to fight with that company. They were experienced and good. So it got more into teaching them and helping them through what they should be doing on an operation. Should we go and search this compound? Should we go and push the Taliban and get them to sort of define their lines a bit? And how are we going to do a full operation with a battle group and sweep this area? And we got to get a bunch of information on that, right? And it was more around how do we get them wanting to go and do their job aggressively rather than just sit back and be passive and drink tea in the strong point.
So how did you do that, or how did you attempt to do that?
A lot of different ways. A lot of it was just persuasion, just talking with them, saying, all right, if you want to have freedom of movement in this area, like look at this example, it's because you patrol there all the time, right? If you're there, the Taliban won't be there because they don't want to get into a firefight with you. They'll try to move around you and, but if you start to define where is really important to them, then they'll start to defend it. So we need to figure out what that is, right? And that doesn't mean we're going to go attack them as a company on our own, but this information is critical. We pass it up, and we can get other resources to come in and deal with that. And that's why we're here, right? That's the reason you're deployed, into Zari district. And sort of just talking through that a lot was helpful for them. But a lot of it also was working the chain of command. I mean, our chain of command, my boss, was really supportive of all that, and he understood it. His counterpart, not so much. He was very risk averse and didn't want them to, get into something they couldn't handle, and didn't want them to be sort of embarrassed and have the coalition come and help them. And there was all this sort of perception, and so a lot of it too was they were willing to do it, but they weren't allowed to do it. Like we'd be on a patrol and we'd see the Taliban sitting up an ambush or something, and I'm going, great. We see their ambush, let's go counter ambush them, right? We can do this, so let's go disrupt this, right? They're right there, they're like 500 meters away. And they're like, okay, well, I gotta ask permission, I gotta send a sit rep, and they'd get told, no, you can't. So then I'd be on the radio, and I'd do the same thing, right? This is sit rep, and my boss is like, great, go counter ambush them. It's like, well, they're being told they're not allowed to. So, so then we'd stand there for an hour basically trying to work through this communication problem, with their chain of command. And a lot of the times it was just like, fine, I mean, that's their chain of command. We just have to back down and let them do their thing, and sort of let my boss, mentor his counterpart. And maybe next time we'll have a little bit more freedom of movement. But
what kind of relationship did you have with the company commander you were mentoring?
The first company was really good. So we kind of changed companies halfway through the tour because they had to rotate back, and another company came in. The first one was good. We had our moments, stressful moments and stuff, but generally, like, we were brothers in arms, right? Like, we were there to help them. They were really appreciative. My counterpart spoke English pretty well, so we could have conversations together, like not through the interpreter. Which was really helpful. And they, as soon as you're, like, the real defining moments for them was if you're in combat and you do what you're supposed to do, like our strong point, we get hit like every 2 or 3 days. And so my sort of spot in one of the towers had the C6 there. So I'd grab the C6 and I'd shoot back at people who are attacking us. And like the ANA loved that. They're like, man, like, we had a guy injured, but you were there, fighting for us, fighting with us. So thank you. Our medic, he won a MID one day when the Taliban fired a recrawless rifle, hit our wall, and basically came through the wall and through a door into where some of the ANA were sleeping, and it like cut this guy's leg off. And so I went up, and started firing back and calling sit rep and trying to get UAV on station and all that kind of stuff. And Denis basically just ran out and grabbed the guy, and tourniqueted his leg and saved his life, right? Stopped his bleed, right? And and they called in a medevac, and and so the ANA were like, I mean, Denis did his job. He did what he was supposed to do, and he did it, under fire and under duress and traumatic injury. And very deserving of the award. And the ANA saw that, saw his actions, and were super appreciative. They go, like, these guys are here to help us, right? Like, we don't have that medical capability, but they're one of us, right? Like, and so they, like, for days they're like, thank you, for your medics' actions. Thank you for being here with us. And that sort of attitude was very pervasive throughout most of the time that we were there.
Do you think you should have been even more closely integrated with them, or can you sort of explain that kind of, in my understanding, right, there's sort of there's the Canadians, the Afghans, you're in the same compound, but, different equipment.
Yeah, so, I don't know, I guess bugbear of mine was the battle group. I think the battle group, we got into this sort of rotation, and the battle group was there to like tick career boxes, right? Like they were there to sort of do a mission, and you could see it like, hey, like it's like we do an exercise. It's all progressive, Well, I'm gonna be here for 6 months with my battalion, and at the end of it, I want to do this, and you sort of work up to this battle group level operation. And a lot of that's natural because you're in a new environment and you're getting it, the handover wasn't that good, and the information you're processing, and that's just sort of the natural evolution of a cycle when you change every 6 months. But I thought that a lot of the battle group was just very isolated and focused on their missions and not integrated, in a collaborative approach to what needed to be done there, right? There's the term they use, put an Afghan face on your mission, and I thought that we just threw that around like kind of cheaply. Put them out front because it's good for them. Well, a lot of people forgot or didn't understand that this is their country, right? Like, we're there to help them in NATO, and it's all good stuff, but this is their country. They're serving their country, and they don't go home after 6 months. Like, most of these guys have been in Kandahar for 5 years, right? Hadn't been paid in like 8 months, and they're still on operation, and that's what they're doing. That's their job, and they're doing it because it's their country. They want to fight for their country. So, like that's the gold stuff. That's what's going to win the war for the Afghans, is that type of mentality and capability. So I didn't find that we were very well integrated. In the omelet we were, because that was our job. We were embedded with them, and I think it worked really well. But you could have expanded that concept, multitudes of ways. If you put a Canadian platoon with them, and they were doing some things like this in Panjwai, and in later tours they kind of went this way. But when I was there, it was very segregated. We actually didn't have, in Zari district, there was no battle group presence for the majority of the tour. So we were the landowners, if is what we called it, and our headquarters controlled, all this sort of coalition traffic that was coming in and out of Zari. And when they did finally post Charlie Company in, it was still very much, they did their thing, and we did a couple joint operations, but I wouldn't call them integrated operations. So, yeah, it wasn't done very well, in my opinion. We had a long way to go, and it wasn't just operations. I mean, it was resources. It was a bunch of things. They were just sort of like, oh, the Afghans are off there doing something out of sight, out of mind, and we're just going to continue to do our own thing.
But within the omelet, within the company that you were attached to, I mean, how to what extent could you, if you wanted to, go native, look like an Afghan, eat what they ate, stuff like that? Yeah,
so, I mean, obviously our gear, our uniforms, like, I had like, I couldn't just take stuff off, and nor would I want to. I had a sort of an ongoing struggle with soldiers to put on their helmets and, and their flak vests and stuff, because they would just get sort of complacent and walk around without their shit on. And we were always like super geared up. I mean, because there's only 4 of us, we basically had to be self-sufficient, that if anything happened, we could operate as a dead and extract ourselves and not rely on them, just as a contingency. So like, one guy was carrying a C9 or the C6. I carried an M203, right, as a captain, and that's just the reality. Like, I had a radio and an M203 and a M72 on me, and tons of ammo, and that's water, like 10 liters of water on you. So that's just the way that we sort of went on operations. But that said, we were totally isolated, right? So I had tons of autonomy to do what I wanted to do, right? Like, I could come up with our patrol schedule and with our counterpart, and really influence when we were going where, and made sure it was varied and sort of hit everywhere we needed to hit and stuff like that. And the rest of the time was ours with the Afghans, so we could do whatever we wanted. So I ran a bunch of courses, I taught them how to shoot their mortar, because we got in a firefight and they didn't know how to use, they knew that like if you put a bomb down it and it kind of went in that direction. But that was it, like that was the extent of their knowledge. So I was like, okay, let's, I'll run a mortar course for you, so pick your sort of 4 superstars, and and we'll run sort of like every second day on our training rest days. I'll run them through drills for a couple hours in the morning. And they're like, great, that's awesome. And we literally started like, okay, what level are you guys at? And I finally figured out they couldn't even count. So the first day was learning how to count to 10, right? So that's where we started, and it kind of went up. But at the end, to their credit, at the end of it, smart guys. We got a sergeant in there that could count, so he could do math. And I had the company commander and then one of the lieutenants like up in a firefight in the OP, picking targets and relaying the coordinates to the mortar, and they were hitting the target, right? So it was actually effective. The weapon was effective rather than just throwing rounds in the direction of the enemy. In terms of eating and stuff, we had a policy that we could go do it because it was important to, on a social level, to get to know them. But we could only send one guy in a particular day, because every once in a while you ate something that didn't quite agree with you, and then you get sick and you're basically out of commission for 3-4 days with food poisoning. So the policy was only one guy could go, because there's so few of us that we can't afford to lose half of us or all of us to food poisoning for a week. So we kind of did that. So it was very, very austere. We ate rations, so it was a nice treat to go have their food once in a while. But we didn't do it very often.
Tell me about the day. I just remember the story you told, a while back. I think you're in contact, and the day that you kind of look around, and it's the Canadians maneuvering. The Afghans have not followed you. Is that, I don't know if that was just a one-off or that was a regular occurrence?
No, it's so the first company, as I described already, was quite good. They were experienced, and most of the soldiers would do their job well, right? But they rotated back to go on leave and stuff. We got a new company, and they were a new Kandahar just formed, and so they were not really. They had people that were experienced and had been in combat before, but as a unit, they were brand new. And I had a much bigger challenge with them in combat. And the funny thing is, this was starting to get into fighting season, and we had moved from Sangasar. We closed that base because it was just so difficult to keep it open. And went back to Wilson. We were out of there for a bit. And getting in combat like every time we went out, so the company commander was like an oxygen thief. Like he would go, okay, we're doing a company attack. Yeah, you guys go over there. I'll be back here. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, you got to go up and command your platoons doing this, like, come on, get up there. And most times I'd go like, okay, I can't stand back here with you at the vehicles. Like, I have to go with your troops, your forward elements, right? Because that's just where you command things from. So on many occasions we get in a firefight, and like there was a fire. We went to this strong point that was on the road, get hit all the time, and basically it was like 200 meters from the first wadi. Like, this wadi system would run just south of the ring road, and so there was lots of cover for them, and then the wadis, there was 4 of them, and they've sort of all converged in this area. So there's 4 wadis kind of in a close proximity. And so there was lots of cover for the Taliban to sort of sneak up and hit this patrol base. So, the best way to sort of push back the enemy is to do aggressive patrolling, right? So we took our company to support the police mentors, because they wanted to go and cut down a bunch of trees along the first wadi. So we're like, okay, fine, we'll go on a patrol, right, and sort of distract the the Taliban so that they could go and cut down these trolls. And there's this road is on the corner of the first wadi. It's called Contact Corner, and the road is called Taliban Road, because if you go stand there for 5 minutes, you're getting into contact. And it's like, okay, well, let's go stand on Contact Corner and see what happens. And yeah, sure enough, we were there for for 5 minutes. I had the sergeant major with me because my warrant officer was on leave, and we were standing, you know, like on the corner of the road, and we see this guy like walk over the road with an AK, and he kind of looks at us. He's like 50 yards away, and he kind of looks at us like shit. So we both shoot at him, you know, and then just like the world just erupts, you know, and like all the ANA guys like dive in the ditch, right? Like they're just like, you know, hiding. And the platoon commander I was with in the ANA, like he did a good job, but he had to go like grab the PKM from the guy because he was just cowering with it, and he took it, and he's like, you know, trying to win the firefight. So it was basically the mentors and a couple soldiers trying to win the firefight, right? And everyone else is just, you know. And you go like, okay. And we actually have a video of this because we had a journalist, a photojournalist with us, Louis Palu, and he's videotaping. And I said like, okay guys, we gotta like win the firefight here so that we can move off this crest, right? So we gotta fire a bunch of rounds at the enemy, right? So that, you know, we can move. And I'm like, okay, ready? We're gonna fire like your magazine. Okay, ready in 5. And the interpreter's trying to interpret this. And the Louis is filming this one guy who's on this berm, and he's like got his head like this, and he's just like shooting, and his rounds are hitting the front of the berm, like he's not even doing anything. So that was the kind of the challenge we had all the time, you know. I would at least ask them, like, if you're gonna dive for the ditch, don't like take my knees out from under me, you know, so that like at least I can still stand and do what I need to do.
Is there any other incidents that stand out for you? I mean, it's a very busy tour, obviously, but
yeah, there's a whole bunch that were kind of self-defining in their own right. You know, there was like one of our roles when we were in Fob Wilson, because we were around on the highway, was to do IED, like QRF, right? And every day, 5 a.m. IED go off, and you just wake up to it, and like the concussion, doesn't matter how far away it was, you know, it could be 4 or 5 kilometers away, and it would just, you know, the tent would just go, and you go, fuck, okay, get up, you know, like let's get our gear on and go out. And that's pretty much how we would start every day. This one day we did that. We went on a patrol early that day, and it was a nice patrol, and we saw a bunch of Taliban. We're like, we're gonna firefight. Okay, we didn't, so we came back, and then an ID went off, so we went out and did that. Then another ID went off, so we went out and did that. Then we had an incident at a police station where there was civilian contractors on the road, and one of the battle group platoons was at the police station, and they were in a firefight, and this contract company stopped, and there was conflicting reports of whether they were shooting, you know, at the Canadians or at the Taliban, or just so we had to react and go get them off the road, right? And move along, and we had a casualty, one of the Canadian casualties, so we had to get him back to medical support. And basically once that was over, our boss came and said, all right, listen, there was 2 police officers that were kidnapped, and we think they're in this house, and we got to mount a Kandak level operation to go rescue them. And we're like, okay, great, let's mount up. And he goes, yeah, I know you guys don't have a lot of information. This is totally hasty orders, fragos, and I don't have much to give you, but you know, this is what we're trained to do. This is what we're good at, as you know, in the omelet. And let's just go do our thing and make it work, right? So we had to line up the entire Kandak and basically do this assault across this field onto this house, you know, cross like a bunch of wadis to get there. And basically what happened was I think they were there, or they were at least, you know, in the area. And as we started to advance, they hopped in a wadi and they sort of egressed to this village, which was on our flank. And then we basically went one company up and secured the line of departure, and my company was to go up and take over the assault and actually assault on this objective, and the defining feature was a wadi. So you had to kind of get it through the wadi and then another 70, 80 meters across this field to this house that was on a, so the fourth wadi, right? And as I'm just setting up to get, guys like lined up and go, we get engaged on our flank. And so I'm like going to make sure everyone's lined up, and this PKM shoots at me, and it right in front of me, like, holy fuck, okay. And then right after that, an 81 millimeter recoilless rifle fires, and I remember looking at this thing, and it's coming right at me, and I'm just thinking like I have no, it was slow motion, right? Like I had no time to react. It was just like, man, that thing's coming right at me, and it dipped like right before it hit us and landed, where the light is, and exploded. Threw me in I actually hit the wadi. It was like 6 feet deep. I hit the wadi and kind of landed in there. Louis Palu was with us, the photojournalist. He got blown back like 10 feet. My interpreter, same thing. And my Corporal Bushy was kind of a little bit behind us and saw this happen. And he goes, fuck, I thought like you had just blown up because you just disappeared because I'd fallen in the wadi. And so he ran over and took me a few seconds. He's calling my name. We go, yeah, I'm okay. Just help me out of this thing. I can't get out. So we kind of suppressed the fire on our flank and then carried on with the mission and assaulted this village, this little compound, and found sort of an old guy in there. He had a knife and he was like acting really, really odd. So had to arrest him and then exfiltrate. And in the end, I mean, we did 5 missions in one day. We didn't find the police officers. I think they'd taken them to the west when they egressed and where they hit us from. This is very exhausting. It was super hot that day. 5 missions in a day. We were out all day. It's like 14 hours. And that was, sort of just a typical day that we had, They the reason they kidnapped those 2 soldiers, the 2 policemen, were they had allegedly raped someone from this village, one of the teenage boys. And so then they hung them up and shot them overnight, basically shot them, and then phoned the police the next day and said, yeah, your guys are in the village, they're dead, so come pick them up. But at the time, it's not a very nice story, right? And it was very dangerous for us to go do that operation, sort of last minute to help these people. But there's never any question from the Afghans or from us that we were going to go do that. Like they saw that policemen were their countrymen and their fellow servicemen, and they're going to go and try to get them back. And unfortunately, they weren't successful. But there was that sense of commitment, on everyone's part to go do what we could do, regardless of what they did or what they were accused of doing or whatever, which a lot of people didn't agree with. They just went and did it anyway, right?
And I forgot, your MID, was that for a particular incident or was that for a...
No, it's for a particular day, yeah. So there's in Wilson, there's a couple police stations we built in Pashmul, Pashmul North, Pashmul South, and Pashmul South. They were hit like almost every day. There's tons of Taliban activity in there, and basically, if you want to patrol there, there's an area called the Graveyard, which is just on the other end of the village. Because it opens up there and stuff, and the Taliban can ambush you there and stuff like that. So you'd always get in a firefight, but a lot of the times they'd ambush you from this set of buildings that was sort of across a field, right? So we thought, well, we need to disrupt this activity, so let's do a company level patrol and just take those buildings by force and then just search them and see what's in there, and if there's anything of value, we can destroy or collect intelligence on or whatever. So we did this, and so we set up this new approach in this patrol. We were just going to basically do fire maneuver, deliberate maneuver across this field from the road, onto these compounds. And we sort of came to this wall, through this grape field, and now we got to get across this field. It's about 70, 80 meters long. And so we need to do it very deliberately, not because we had a lot of tactical indicators, but just because we knew, the history of the place. We knew we were being watched, and so just being very deliberate. So I send a section over, and Lance was, with that section to go establish a foothold, right? And then we could start to move more guys across. And as soon as they're across, they started to get in contact. And we had another police patrol sort of to our north on our flank, and that's where our JTAC was. So we're trying to communicate, where's this guy shooting from, and basically as this is evolving, it just starts to erode. Like more Taliban are popping up, and I'm sitting there watching this, and I see sort of a bunch of Taliban starting to flank them, and basically they were against a wall, and the Taliban was preventing them from moving around the wall and gaining entry in the village. And then on the other side, they were flanking them. They were basically just going to come up to the point where they can shoot down the wall. So we were trying to suppress them from there, and it wasn't really working. So just made a decision, like, I need to get them out of this, situation they're in. And they, they're not quite doing it because they're overwhelmed with what's going on. So I just made the decision to cross the field and reinforce them, right? So I just said, I'm going, like, you can come with me or not, but I'm leaving, I'm going up there. Bushy followed me, and as soon as Bushy and I hopped over the wall and started running, the company commander and a couple of the other sort of ANA guys followed me. And as soon as they saw us running across the field, like machine gun trained on us, and they're shooting, and they're like, it's like coming like right through Bushy and I. I don't know how we didn't get hit, because there was right against our equipment, holes in our equipment, run against this. So we get there and start just fighting around the corner and trying to push them off. And I told Lance, like, you need to breach this wall. And he's like, how, what? And the A&A guy, I'm like, just make a fucking hole in the wall. Like, I don't care how you do it. And I was like, here's my bayonet. Like, dig a fucking hole in the wall. And so they had just a bunch of guys, make a hole. As we're, fighting on each corner, just pieing the corner and shooting at guys like 30, 40 meters away, trying to get just some respite so they couldn't move around on our flank. They ended up making a hole, and there's guys in the village, so, throwing grenades in and just sort of occupying by force, fighting our way through so we can gain a foothold. As we're doing that, I was, I remember, talking on the radio, and I'm talking to our JTAC. We call him Bucky, is Warren Buchanan, and I'm going like, okay, I need artillery support here or whatever. And Bushy tackles me, and I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? He goes, there was machine gun bullets landing right beside your head, and you didn't even notice. That's how kind of chaotic, was going on. It was going on. So we found, we sort of forced entry into the village, and went, and then we occupied this giant crater, which was from a 2,000-pound bomb we had dropped on this sort of location 5 days before from the other end, where we always got ambushed from. So now we're in this giant crater, and we had an F-16 come on station, and so I was trying to call in artillery, and calling artillery 50 meters away from us, right? And I remember just thinking man, I hope I got my coordinates right, because this is super, super close. The artillery came in, and there's still some guys around. So the F-16 came on, and he dropped a bomb on the house, it was 50 meters away. And we were so close, the house exploded, and chunks of the building were landing on us, like this big flew up in the air and landed on us. And then he was kind of doing runs with his 25 millimeter cannon to suppress the enemy that was kind of in that area. So once we sort of won the firefight in a sense, that it forced the Taliban to sort of withdraw because we had superior firepower, and then we withdrew. So I was awarded a mention in dispatches for, kind of crossing the field and reinforcing the section that was there, and trying to just win the firefight.
How many people are you in this section? This whole battle you just described, this firefight you just described, how many people are we talking about being actively involved?
Well, the section that was up there was like 10 guys. And then we initially reinforced with 4. And then we had a whole company. So as soon as we sort of started to get, like as soon as we gained access to the village, then we were able to move more guys up. And, you know, a little bit after we crossed the field, one of the machine gunners was sort of one of the braver guys, you know, saw we needed help, and he started to move up sort of more deliberately and engaging targets to provide cover for us and stuff. So eventually we ended up moving the whole company up, you know, and I sort of just totally occupied the village. And our JTAC, who was off on the side, was managed to work his way over to us and, you know, call in. It's kind of hard for him to call in like super danger close stuff when he's not there to see it, right? Because it's so close. So he managed to work his way over to us and was able to call things in, you know, from my site. So we ended up with 70 guys kind of in that village, but it started with 7 and 10 and then sort of 15 and then sort of trickled in a few more.
All these things that happen to you, are they all ingrained in your mind in such detail as what you just described?
Yeah. A lot of them are. I'm sure there's a ton of details that I don't remember or I didn't realize were happening because so many things happen. But yeah, I remember a lot of things very distinctly, even though, I mean, people ask me now, like, how long ago were you there? And I say 8 years, and I can't believe it's been 8 years, you know, since then. It just seems like the time it's like I was there yesterday. But yeah, I remember things very distinctly, very vividly, and not all the time. I mean, not like every day, minute of every day, but a lot of the time you just sort of think about something, or you know, you smell something in a certain way, and it reminds you of something from one of those days.
So after enduring this kind of day after day, weeks, months, what kind of what kind of state were you in when it was time to leave Afghanistan?
Hypervigilant, I think you'd call it. Like it was very stressful all the time, even though we didn't get into a firefight every day. There was always the threat of it. And as soon as you started moving on the roads, like you're just basically sitting in the RG going like, am I going to blow up? Am I going to blow up? Right? Like, when's it going to happen? And that just stress just wears on you, right? And you just kind of get irritable and stuff after a while. And like our tour was extended because they were trying to move the handovers, sort of adjust them a bit. So we were there for just under 9 months. Which was a lot for a combat tour. So yeah, it was near the end of it. I think a lot of guys were just ready to go home. Like they were not trying to get out of missions, but they were just like just didn't want to do it anymore, right? Like it's time to go home. It was just very irritable, very stressed type of time in my life. So people were happy to hand over. But the funny thing is, at the end of the day, when it came time to do the handover, I think most of us were like didn't actually want to leave. Like, you know, we knew an opportunity like this wasn't like, this is why we joined the Army, right? You didn't join the Army to go to garrison, and you know, I didn't join the Army to polish boots and go on parade and stuff. You do it to do combat operations, right? So you're there, you're on combat operations. When are you going to do it again? You know, we were doing everything that you wanted to do as a soldier. We had enablers, call fast air artillery, work with coalition partners, Afghans. You know, this was the time, right? So a lot of us were like, man, like I want to go home, right? But I don't want this to end. I want to stay. So
How ultimately, how effective do you think that omelet model was?
I think it was highly effective. Like one of the challenges is, I mean, there's no answer to this. This is what NATO has struggled with: is how much do we do? When do we hand over? How much do we let them do? Right? And what is it exactly what we're trying to achieve? And for me, like I always, I felt really good about our mission was purely to teach and enable them. And I hope that, I only spent just under 9 months with them, sort of 4.5 months with each company, that something I taught them, today they're still there, right? Something I taught them today they'll remember, and they'll be able to lean on that, and and they're just better soldiers for the time I spent with them. And and that's exactly what, in my opinion, our mission there was to do, right? Was to enable them. It's their country, it's their civilian population, it's their government. There's no solution that we, the Western world, can provide to them. They need to do it on their own. They need to do it in their own way and on their own timeline and stuff. So that doesn't mean we can't help them, right? So there's that balance, right? And you saw it in everyday things, like, batteries. Like, we had to, teach them how to do like logistical resupply and stuff, right? And develop their logistical supply chain. And we go, okay, well, you need to order batteries because like you're low on batteries. And they go, well, yeah, well, why would we order batteries? You have batteries. Like just give me your batteries. You're my friend, right? Like, yeah, sure, I'll give you batteries. But the point isn't for me to give you batteries. It's to teach you and to teach your supply chain that you need batteries. So when they do a resupply, they put batteries on there for you, right? And so there was always that dynamic. As long as we're there, we're sort of handicapping them in their full development, right? And you had to figure out where that balancing point was, where you help them by giving them stuff, or you help them by being the parent that said, no, I'm not giving you batteries, because if you don't, then you won't have any, right?
What about the bonds between you and the other 3 or 4 guys you're with? Like, what was it like then? What's it like today in terms of those connections?
It was very close then. I mean, there was still, like, we were very close, very comfortable with each other. It wasn't a hierarchical team, right, where I'm the boss and you call me sir. It's like we worked very closely together. But there was everyone had their sort of defined role, and there was never any issues. Like, if I asked, like, Corporal Bushy, for example, like, he was a corporal and he was carried a C9, and I would tell him, go with that section over there and cover the flanks, and and off you go, right? Just like you would expect a sergeant or someone way more experienced than he had to do. So my guys were totally reliable, totally independent, but communicated and worked really well together. It was really close-knit group. And today, I mean, we don't talk a lot together today, but I know, like, if we met up and went for a beer or reunion together, it'd be like, like no time had passed. So that's sort of those bonds you form are there, for the rest of your life.
And now this time when you leave the operation, now you're going to decompression, right?
Yeah.
What are your impressions of that? What did you do?
So decompression, like, we ended up going back to CAF, a couple days of briefings and stuff, and on a plane, and we landed in Cyprus. A lot of guys were super unhappy about going to Cyprus because they're like, man, I've been gone for long. My kids are at home. I just want to go home, right? And the lectures that they gave us, a lot of them were just, I want to call them worthless. Maybe from my perception, like, a lot of people might argue with me, but they were just, not helpful. A lot of them didn't really speak to the experience that we went through. But the value of that time was decompression, like just time to go and relax. And I found that, as an example, they have all these activities. And I mean, I'm a scuba diver. I wanted to go scuba diving, but they wouldn't let you do that because that wasn't an approved activity. And all the activities they had were like, go sort of mini golfing and get drunk, go go-karting and get drunk, like everything kind of enrolled around alcohol and just, getting drunk and forgetting about things. It's like, well, I haven't had any alcohol for 9 months. Like, I'm not interested in that. Like, I want to go and just relax, right? I want to go do something that I want to do, right? And a few of us kind of went off and organized like a deep sea fishing, and we never actually caught any fish, but we just sat on the end of a boat, like Rob Peel and Lance Nilsson and myself, just sat on a boat on the Mediterranean, and looked at the sunset and just like it was peaceful, right? And that's what we were looking for. Just time to just unwind. And yeah, so we went out a couple nights and got drunk and did that sort of thing, but it wasn't all that, it wasn't just a waste of time for us. So I thought that time was really valuable to work out all those sort of knots that were, that stress had sort of imposed on you, right? And it didn't end there. I mean, it took months, to sort of get the chemical rebalance in your body, and, the human body sort of regenerates through sleep and stuff, right? So there's a lot of tossing and turning at night and sort of nightmares and things like that. Your body just your mind just processing things. So 4 days is not sufficient. Like, it's not like you're cured after 4 days, right? You're back home, you're normal. It takes a long time, but Cyprus was, in my mind, critical for that, just to, keep an eye on guys and make sure that, they can do that in a sort of controlled environment. If you were just to drop everyone off in Edmonton and say goodbye, which is what happened with us again, I spent like 6 hours on the base and then I was released back to Calgary. There would have been way more incidents of guys, driving drunk, whatever, or getting to fights at the bar because they're just not in that controlled environment anymore and they're super vigilant, hyper vigilant. So I think it was a good way to transition back home.
Can you just describe how you were welcomed back when your flight did arrive in Edmonton? What was the reception like?
Yeah, well, I mean, when we landed in Cyprus, maybe it was a good place to start. Like, all the staff, the Canadian Forces staff, were all like standing up and clapping and stuff, and that was a good feeling to see that. Very appreciative, and kind of it was the first taste of just knowing how people appreciated your service over there, and they knew it was a hard tour and stuff like that. And then same thing in Edmonton. I mean, we were welcomed at the LTF Center, and people all along the highway and stuff, ribbons all over the place when you got home. Tons of people at the LTF to visit you and greet you. So yeah, it was a really good, positive community involvement in welcoming us home, and it was a good feeling.
Did you? Some people I've talked to in different tours, have said that they come back and there's a certain amount of anger for whatever reason when they come back. Did you experience that?
Yeah, I was angry for a lot of I wasn't angry at the Army or my experience or anything like that, because generally I had a positive experience. But I was angry a lot of times for stupid reasons, and I think it's just a physiological reaction to stress, right? Like, I would get angry for the dumbest thing, and it was hard. It took a lot of time and sort of inner searching, soul searching, and I talked to a few counselors and stuff just to help kind of work through this stuff. Like, at some like conscientious issues, and we killed a lot of people. Some of them are kids, right? So you got to work through that. Like, did I do a good thing? Did I do my mission? Did I cross the bounds? Am I a bad person? That type of thing. So you just got to work through that, right? You got to talk about it. You got to just admit that this is natural. This is just something that soldiers go through. When you have combat, even if you weren't in combat, you're just in stressful situations. These are things you got to work through, and it's okay to talk about it with your buddies, with your family, with a counselor and stuff like that. So, yeah, definitely angry because of that sort of issue. But it's something you got to address. So, if you don't address it and you don't confront it and you don't work through it, it just sits there, right? And you just continue to be angry for no reason, or upset, or whatever your reaction to it is. It's not good things. You gotta confront it and get over it.
How when it comes to that, the counselors you referred to, how useful or how helpful has the military system been?
I mean, the system in terms of getting me in touch with stuff, like, great, no problems. You know, you phone the number and they're very helpful and they get you in touch with what you need right away. I'm not, like, personally speaking, I don't think the counselors helped me that much. I didn't find that they really understood the issues. Like, they just kind of went through their, you know, their sort of normal mantra, like, do this breathing exercise. And I'm like, okay, breathing exercise isn't going to fucking help me, right? So but I still found sort of, you know, it was helpful for me just to go through it and go, okay, like, at least I talked about it to somebody, and they may not have got it, right? But I still was able just to talk about it, and that helped me anyway. Like, I'm sure everyone has their own experiences and stuff and different needs of what they need from a counselor and stuff. But yeah, I found that going to a civilian counselor was challenging because they didn't get the experience, the guys that we had, or that I had, right? So I think we still have ways to go to get counselors trained, you know, to understand the circumstances and understand how to deal with people in those scenarios. But overall, it was really good. I mean, I think the military's come a long way through the years and having resources. There's certainly tons of resources out there for guys to tap into if they want.
My last question for you is, how do you think these deployments have affected or changed you as a person, as a soldier?
Well, I mean, as a soldier, like, they were both sort of highlights of my professional development. I mean, like, you know, especially in the reserves, you don't have a lot of time to train, right? You kind of do what you are supposed to do on course, and you're competent, and you maybe do a couple exercises throughout the year. But once you leave the platoon commander level, you don't do a lot of, like, tactical things, right? Experiences. So that stuff really starts to wane. You do a lot more educational training, right? So the skills are there, but you know, but these were very concentrated times of experience, and that's stuck with me. You know, like, of course, there's skill fade still from them. It's 8 years since Afghanistan, but those sort of heightened my level of experience as a soldier. And personally, I mean, the Army has defined who I am as a person and how I conduct myself in the civilian world, and I have a much greater sort of sense of confidence and accomplishment. You know, I have no regrets or reservations about what I've done in my life. I kind of missed a big chunk of my civilian career when I compare myself to my peers. You know, they work for an oil company for 10 years. I worked for the Army for 10 years. So it's not really comparable, but I wouldn't trade my experience for anything, because those skill sets I learned or I developed, the confidence, go way beyond what I would have had if I had just had a normal civilian career for the start of it.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you about Afghanistan, or anything that you want to say to wrap things up?
I don't think so. I mean, I could probably talk about this for hours, but we covered a lot.
Any regrets that you didn't join the regular force?
Yes and no. I mean, I always had aspirations to try out for special forces and join the regular force, and I love the Army. So whenever I do Army things full time, you know, I kind of regret that I'm not doing that. But you know, I took on a new challenge, something that really interested me and inspired me. You know, on the civilian side as well, and that's going really well. So, there's always regrets in life. You can't do everything, but I'm really happy with, you know, where I'm going in my civilian career, and still working with the Calgary Highlanders and the reserves and that kind of thing. One thing I did notice, like, I was on the command team course a couple weeks ago in Kingston, and I have noticed a really big change in the Afghanistan mission in this mentality towards the reserves in the Army. And I think a lot of people and institutionally has really renewed the role of the reserves and the capabilities of the reserves to augment the Canadian Forces mission, right? Canada First Defence Strategy and our role in international operations. And a lot of people came out of Afghanistan going, the reserves are important, they're capable, and we need them to fill, 20% of our missions as augmentees. And we got to give them the tools and the training and the institutional support to do that. And that's a big development, I think, for our military, compared to the 90s, right? Pre-Afghanistan and that sort of Cold War mentality where it was very separate. When I joined the Army, it was kind of the tail end of that, and I experienced that sort of shift and change through Afghanistan to where we are now. And from people I talk to and things I hear from sort of the leadership is very positive, and the future looks good for the reserves because of that.
So you don't see post-Afghanistan, a bit of a slide back to the old days, sort of that antipathy between the regs and the reserve, or?
I don't see it from an attitude perspective. I think a lot of people, it's still kind of there because the Army is, just the culture of the Army is like, there's us and then there's them. So if you're not working on the same thing, you're one of them. So there's that natural kind of rift. But I think a lot of people change their tune, right? And if you really start to socially sort of communicate that, then people, that you have animosity, then people are going to correct you, which is totally different than before. And most importantly, institutionally, when the Army is developing plans, okay, this mission is going to go here, what are we going to ask the reserves to do? We actually still have a renewed role, right? People are reminding people, this is the role of the reserves, this is what you have to train to, right? And these are the resources we're trying to get you to do that. So we're not there, right? Like, the Army has challenges, right? We're really short of people and equipment and stuff all around, right? You got to share what we have and put it in priority and stuff. But the intent is there. The attitude has changed in my mind, and that's the first step. That's like, if you're going to get better, if you're going to improve, and you're going to grow the reserves and grow the mandate and stuff, that's like the first step to being successful.
Do you think you'll ever deploy again? Would you want to?
I'm not sure. I'd like to. Maybe not right now. I just started a business. I have a 2-year-old daughter. So I want to be around for her and stuff. And so it'd be challenging to deploy right now. So certainly, if something happened and Canada needed me to deploy, I would, without question. But given the choice at this time, I'll focus on those things. Maybe in 5-10 years, I'm a little bit older, daughter's grown up a bit, business is stabilized and I can step away for a year, then definitely would look to the next chapter, the next deployment.
That's great. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.